Hi, Dolores. Hi, Cheyenne. Hope you too are having a wonderful holiday season. I'll be with you in just a couple of minutes. Mhm. Hello, hello. Thank you for coming, and I hope you're having a very wonderful holiday. Bonnie and I have been having a very wonderful holiday. That is, we've been having a very wonderful holiday, except for all the terrible news that we read about. But constantly, hi Richard, hi Steve, hi Greg. How's everybody doing? Hope you're all well. Hi Susan. Okay. Thanks everybody for coming. Okay, tonight what I want to do is to talk about two short news articles. I want to go through those to get our juices flowing, as it were. Then I want to talk about the day one agenda. Hi, Sam Woods. What I want to talk about then is the day one agenda. I hope we're talking about here the day one agenda. Okay, Bernie Sanders, of course. I expect it will be the bird one agenda um, of Bernie Sanders. The only way the agenda is going to get fulfilled is if Bernie Sanders is going to be the president, will be fulfilling the day one agenda. And Greg points out that his phone has died, so he had to switch to his PC to tune in, and says, "At least I'm here." Well, I'm glad you're here, Greg, and thank you very much for coming. Okay, so let me start by sharing. by sharing the first of the articles I want to go through. And that's an article about Mike Bloomberg. There was a report that appeared in The Intercept that evidently, if we're to believe him, gave Mr. Bloomberg a little bit of a surprise. The article revealed, okay, it was published, by the way, late Tuesday, the 24th. And according to this article by Jake Johnson, staff writer, published on Christmas Day, former New York City Mayor Mr. Bloomberg said in a statement that Tuesday that The Intercept's explosive report on his presidential campaign's use of prison labor to make phone calls is, quote, fundamentally accurate, unquote, but insisted he was not aware of the practice, which prompted a torrent of outrage from civil rights advocates. Of course. Quote, earlier today, a news outlet reported that prison workers were being used by a subcontractor to make telephone calls on behalf of my campaign, Mr. Bloomberg said. And, quote, again, quote, I'm not attacking the news. The story was fundamentally accurate, unquote. And here comes the lie. Quote, we only learned about this when the reporter called us, unquote. And Bloomberg added, but as soon as we discovered which vendor subcontractor had done this, we immediately ended our relationship with the company and the people who hired them, unquote. So, Mr. Bloomberg was claiming plausible deniability that he did not know anything about this because he employed a contractor, it's a vendor, and the vendor had a subcontractor, and the subcontractor was the one who was employing prison labor. And Mr. Bloomberg had levels between he and the subcontractor, and he didn't know. So the question is whether he sets up all of his structures of contracting so he's going to have plausible deniability. That's the issue that immediately comes up. Anyway, Bloomberg's campaign contracted the New Jersey-based call center company Procom through a third-party vendor. And Procom runs call centers in New Jersey and Oklahoma. Two of the call centers in Oklahoma are operated out of state prisons. This is what The Intercept said. Unquote, and at least one of the two prisons, incarcerated people were contracted to make calls on behalf of the Bloomberg campaign, unquote. And an anonymous source told The Intercept that people incarcerated at the Dr. Eddie Warrior Correctional Center and Oklahoma Women's Prison were making calls to California for Bloomberg's campaign. You know, that $100 million he's been spending all over the country with the huge amount being spent in California. That's what was using the prison labor. So this isn't any ancient thing. This is something Bloomberg was doing right now in the last weeks since he got into the campaign. Quote, the people were required to end their calls by disclosing what the calls were paid for by the Bloomberg campaign. By disclosing that the calls were paid for by the Bloomberg campaign, unquote, according to The Intercept. Quote, they did not disclose, however, that they were calling from behind bars. So Bloomberg campaign said they ended the arrangement with Procom after The Intercept inquired about the use of prison labor. And Alex Friedman, managing editor of Prison Legal News, told The Intercept that, quote, use of labor is the continued exploitation of people who are locked up, who really have virtually no other opportunities to have employment or make money other than the opportunities given to them by prison officials. Friedman said that while it is, quote, entirely possible, unquote, that Bloomberg was not aware that incarcerated people were making calls on behalf of his campaign, that's like saying department stores making clothes in Southeast Asia don't know that 5-year-olds are stitching together their soccer balls, unquote. It is kind of like that. I don't know if it's completely like saying that, but it seems to me it's equally reprehensible. Anyway, David Cleon, news editor at Jewish Current, said the billionaire presidential campaign candidate's use of prison labor, quote, shouldn't be seen as just a fuck up or a moral failing, unquote. Quote, there should be legal and civil consequences for it. Compelling political speech from incarcerated people should be considered unconstitutional. So there's not only the angle here that there's basically slave labor getting employed for his campaign. And I know it's not really legally slave labor because they are paying the prisoners something. I don't know, maybe $1 an hour, or maybe $2 an hour. Yeah, Bonnie says maybe $1 a day. We don't know exactly what they're paying them, but we do know it's way, 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 way below the minimum wage. Even the minimum wage, which of course is is just unconscionable these days. So there's that angle, but then there's the angle that they're compelling political speech from these incarcerated people. And I think Cleon is right. That should be considered unconstitutional. Quote, it's honestly one of the most evil things we've ever seen from a presidential campaign, and hopefully Bloomberg's campaign will end with him paying out unimaginable sums to the people he exploited. In a just world, it would. Unquote. As it happens, I saw a tweet today as well that pointed out, I presume correctly, sounds right, that in 1996, when old Bill Clinton was getting ready for his second term as president, Mr. Bloomberg's fortune was then set at $1 billion. Since then, through the second Clinton term, the 2 terms of George Bush, the 2 terms of Obama, the sainted one, and the 1 term of Donald Trump, thus far, and Bloomberg now has a fortune of $56.1 billion. How could that happen? How could that happen unless the current system is rigged to allow him a gain of wealth of 56 to 1? 56 to 1 over roughly 23 years. That is an amazing gain in wealth. Anyway, moving on to the second article. I thought that article was just an outrage, by the way. Just an outrage. I'm sure you did too. Maybe after Christmas, we need a little bit of outrage to get us going. What do you think? Maybe? Anyway, Anyway, again, I hope you've had a very, very good Christmas holiday and that your battery is recharged so we can contemplate outrages like this. And so here's the second outrage. This was actually published on Monday, December 23rd. And the headline is, okay, it comes from Common Dreams again. And it's from an article by Jake Johnson again. And it starts with a quote, "Cutting Social Security is murder," unquote. Flood of public outrage greets Trump's proposal to slash benefits for hundreds of thousands. Do tell. I'll go to Clearly for this one. So you can see it better. Protesters rally against Social Security cuts on December 10, 2012 in Doral, Florida. Quote, "This policy change is abhorrent and absolutely unjustifiable," unquote. Absolutely. Absolutely both. Absolutely abhorrent and absolutely unjustifiable. We all know, quote, "We all know that the cruelty is the point with this administration, but this sinks to yet another low," unquote. I don't know about that. I thought separating parents and children was a terrible low. I also thought that participating in the Yemen war and bombing civilians was a very, very low point, lower than this. Quote again, "This would be a crushing blow to me and my family," unquote. Those are just a few of the more than 1,700 official comments members of the U.S. public have left on Trump's proposed Social Security rule change, which could strip life-saving disability benefits from hundreds of thousands of people. Quote, "They want to destroy every part of Social Security, including retirement benefits, and turn it over to their criminal friends on Wall Street. We must stop Trump's plan," unquote. That was a tweet from Alex Lawson, who's currently president or executive director, I forget what his exact title is, of Social Security Works. Anyway, he's the executive, the chief executive of that group. Okay, at this point, the proposal received hardly any media attention when it was first published in the Federal Register in November, but recent reporting on the proposed rule change, as well as outrage from progressive Social Security advocates, sparked a flood of public condemnation and calls for the Trump administration to reverse course. Backlash against the proposal can be seen in the public comments section for the rule, we're self-identified, but people who are physicians, people with disabilities, social workers, and others have condemned the change as monstrous and potentially deadly. And we can join in and go make more public comments. Number of public comments has ballooned in recent days, going from less than 200 to more than 1,700 in a week. The public comment period ends on January 17, 2020. Comments can be submitted here, and there's a link to where you can go and make the comments. Hopefully, we can get those comments up to at least 10,000 by January 17, 2020. We still have something like 20 or 21 days to go. Quote, "Cutting Social Security is murder, and this immoral administration knows it," unquote, wrote one commenter. Quote, "I will fight it every way I can." Well, I hate to mention it again, but I will. One way to fight it, of course, is to bully your senators into stating they're willing to vote for conviction of this president. Now, I know he isn't yet charged with anything related to this particular rule change, but that's all right. The point is, if you want nasty things like this to stop now, rather than wait until January of 2021, you have to be for a quick conviction as soon as Nancy Pelosi sends the articles of impeachment over to the Senate. A commenter who identified as Carla Kirshner said Social Security is her, quote, only source of income. So if you want Carla Kirshner to live, or to continue to live, one great help to that would be to get Trump out of there by the end of January. Quote, if I lose my checks, there will be nothing left to keep me alive, Kirshner wrote. Trump administration's proposal would add another layer of complexity to the process of obtaining Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, and Supplemental Security Income, SSI benefits. If implemented, the rule change would require people categorized by the federal government as Step 5 recipients, typically older individuals with serious physical ailments or mental illness, and others, to reprove their benefit eligibility every 2 years. Critics and policy experts warn that the goal of imposing the criteria that are eligibility criteria that are more onerous on disabled Social Security recipients is to slash people's benefits. An estimated 4.4 million people would be subject to the requirement if the Trump administration's proposal takes effect, according to the Philadelphia Inquirer. Alex Lawson, who again is executive director of progressive advocacy group Social Security Works, wrote in an op-ed last week that, quote, there is no justification for this policy. And we know from the financial point of view, there's utterly no justification for this policy. Social Security can continue to afford these particular payments. It's all based on congressional appropriations. Anyway, we have a sovereign currency in the United States. We are also a monetarily sovereign country when it comes to our currency. So we can always pay all our debts, including the debts to our Social Security recipients. So there's no justification for this policy. It's cruelty. It's just cruelty. Quote, the United States already has some of the strictest eligibility criteria for disability benefits in the world, unquote, said Alex Lawson. Quote, more than half of all claims are denied. The Trump administration is trying to cut Social Security benefits for hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities. That's a hashtag Social Security. We cannot let Trump get away with this cruelty. An attack on any part of Social Security is an attack on the entire system. And that was a tweet by Social Security Works, so essentially by Alex, on December 20th, 2019. Lawson urged members of the public to call their elected officials and leave a comment on the Trump administration's proposal because, quote, if they are allowed to get away with this attack, it will be only the beginning, unquote. Well, that's a serious matter. It will be only the beginning, and so that's very serious. But after all, for me, it's extraordinarily serious that some people like the lady quoted earlier, Kirshner, will die as a result of this particular policy. If one person dies as a result of this particular rule change, that is one person too many, because there is no need for this. It is just plain cruelty. Quote from Lawson: they want to destroy every part of Social Security, including retirement benefits, and turn it over to their criminal friends on Wall Street. We must stop Trump's plan, unquote. And I agree, we must. And he continues, quote, if we let the politicians in Washington take away some people's earned benefits, it means they can take away they can take away all of our earned benefits, unquote. And of course, they can. They can make these extraordinary rules changes that result in people not being able to exercise the benefits they are entitled to under the law. We're not even talking about action from Congress here. We're talking about strange executive orders that subject people to the risk of loss of their Social Security benefits. So we got to fight hard on this one, folks. So this brings me to the main topic, our main topic here, which is Day One agenda. Hopefully, the Day One agenda of Bernie Sanders. But before I launch into that agenda, let me remind you to please share, like, and subscribe. Share and like this particular video on Facebook. And also, please share, like, and subscribe to my YouTube page when this video goes up on YouTube, which will be roughly 20 minutes after I finish here tonight. So going back, we're talking about an article written by Dave Dayen called the Day One Agenda, which was part of a special issue of the American Prospect that was on various aspects of the Day One Agenda, but this article kind of gives an overview and summary. And you can see in the subtitle there, the next administration using presidential power for good. This one was originally published on September 23rd of 2019. We take it up now because there has been an attack on the idea of the Day One agenda as expressed here, which appeared in Jacobin fairly recently. I won't go over that at all tonight. I will hold both that, and Dave's response to that for my next video on Saturday night. But I wanted to do the first of the articles here tonight. So let us get to it now. I'll put this on clearly. Again, this is from the American Prospect, which is the magazine that now is edited by Dave Dayen. He's the editor-in-chief as well as a main writer for the American Prospect. And he says President Obama inspired a lot of progressive disappointment for failing to live up to his lofty rhetoric. I wonder when he ever lived up to it, but that's another question. But a strain of liberal thought defended him by insisting that presidents just weren't that powerful. And political scientist Brendan Nyhan mocked the mindset of the uninitiated by calling it the Green Lantern theory of the presidency, after the DC Comics hero possessed a ring that gave him near total power, bound only by his imagination and will. And since he was always getting himself into trouble, I submit there were significant limits to his imagination, if not to his will. In the comic, I mean. To Nyhan, partisans hold the misguided notion that a president, quote, can achieve any political or policy objective only he tries hard enough or uses the right tactics, unquote. In reality, he argued, a strong legislature, the Supreme Court that can overturn laws, and the dynamics of a polarized age make policy accomplishments a difficult climb. Well, maybe so, but it may be only certain policy accomplishments or certain kinds of policy accomplishments. Because I submit that Donald Trump has had a comparatively easy time getting many, many horrible things accomplished in the presidency. Of course, the first 2 years he had a Republican House and a Republican Senate. But still, the level of the things he did should have been enough for many of the Republicans to block him in the legislature, but it was not to be. But even, of course, since he's had a Democratic House supposedly checking him, we have continued to have disasters in policy caused by his rulemaking, and also legislation that, after some conflict, passes with bipartisan support, with the Democrats in the legislature basically caving to the president, and caving to the Republicans. Anyway, going on with Dave's article, theoretically speaking, this is all correct. A president has a thicket of checks and balances to maneuver through. However, America has also been passing laws for over 232 years, and buried in the U.S. Code are the raw materials for fundamental change. It doesn't take Green Lantern's ring to unearth these possibilities, just the president willing to use the laws already passed to their fullest potential, and also a staff of busy little bees who are ferreting out the possibilities under the law for rulemaking that can have really devastating changes by the president. The Prospect, the magazine, the American Prospect, has identified 30 meaningful executive actions, all derived from authority in specific statutes, which could be implemented on day one by a new president. That new president, of course, will be very busy signing the executive orders on day one. He says these would not be executive orders, much less abuses of authority, but strategic exercise of highly legitimate presidential power. Without signing a single new law, the next president can lower prescription drug prices, cancel student debt, break up the big banks, give everybody who wants one a bank account, counteract the dominance of the power of the monopolies, protect farmers from price discrimination and unfair dealing, force divestment from fossil fuel projects, and I'm reading from Dave now, close a slew of tax loopholes, hold crooked CEOs accountable, mandate reductions of greenhouse gas emissions, allow the effective legalization of um, 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 the effective legalization of marijuana, make it easier for 800,000 workers to join a union, and much, much more. We have compiled a series of essays to explain precisely how and under what authority the next president can accomplish all this. The need for a day one agenda is particularly acute as we head into 2020. I keep sensing an undercurrent of despair when talking to liberal partisans about the election, a sigh that beating Trump is not enough, but all that can be done. Yes, Democrats are only an even money shot at best to flip the Senate, and yes, even if they succeed, Mitch, quote, Grim Reaper, unquote, Senator McConnell can obstruct the majority with the filibuster, and it would not be up to the next president, but the 50th senator, ideologically, someone like Joe Manchin or Kristen Sinema, to agree to change the Senate rules to eliminate the 60 vote threshold for legislation. And then he remarks there's always budget reconciliation, but that limited path goes through the same conservative Dems, unquote. But this reality does not have to inspire progressive anguish. Anyone telling you that a Democratic victory next November would merely signal 4 years of endless gridlock hasn't thought about the possibilities laid out in this issue. And if you doubt the opportunity for strong executive action, let me direct your attention to Donald Trump. Make no mistake, Trump is an autocrat, more than willing to break the law to realize his campaign promises. His invocation of inherent extreme executive power, egged on chiefly by Attorney General Bill Barr, is in fact dangerous. As former Representative Brad Miller lays out for us later in this issue. Trump has asserted the right to ignore Congress's oversight function, to reinterpret laws based on his own preferences, hide information from lawmakers and the public, promise pardons but before illegal actions take place. He can appoint, he has appointed acting heads of out federal agencies without advice and consent from the Senate, and he's raised the specter of emergency to follow through on his campaign promises. But in a significant number of cases, Trump's pathway is sprung from a simple proposition. When Congress gives the executive branch authority, the president, can actually use it. I, of course, would love to see that happen with respect to the platinum coin. I would love to see Bernie Sanders mint or have the secretary, have the director of the mint actually mint a platinum coin with a face value of 100 trillion to be deposited in the mint's public enterprise fund account, which would then be swept for the seigniorage, which would then be placed in the Treasury spending account. The seigniorage, of course, there is nearly the $100 trillion, $100 trillion minus roughly $500,000 is the difference between the expenses of minting the coin and getting it up to the New York Fed and depositing it there, uh, compared to the value of the face value of the coin, which is $100 trillion. So, Trump's Health and Human Services Secretary is employing the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938 to test the importation of low-cost prescription drugs from Canada. His education secretary canceled student debt automatically for 25,000 disabled vets, implementing part of the Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2008. His agriculture secretary is resurfacing the work requirements already present in the SNAP program statute to prevent states from waiving them. We've similarly seen Trump apply Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 to impose tariffs on imports he deems as presenting a risk to national security. He's also used the Commodity Credit Corporation, established in 1933, to send billions of dollars to farmers, to protect them from the blowback from his own tariffs. Even his most tyrannical actions, by transferring billions from the Defense Department to build sections of a wall along the Mexican border, had the backing of a federal law, the National Emergencies Act of 1976. Uh, so that law allows limited circumstances for presidents to move around money despite Congress holding the purse strings. It was such an emergency that he waited 7 months to announce the second batch of funding shifts. Few of Trump's ideas have been good policy from a progressive perspective. Some, like the invocation of emergency powers, are a common tool of despots, which never turns out well, even when used by small d Democrats, from Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus to Roosevelt's Japanese internment camps. But Congress has routinely transferred its authority to the executive branch, putting arrow after arrow into a quiver that presidents now have in their arsenal. I despise the radical unitary executive, quote unquote, theories that misread the Constitution to presume an unassailable executive, but the president, by definition, carries out the laws. Trump has been using it for ill. An effective Democratic president could use it for good. Now, the U.S. government is one of the world's largest purchasers of goods and services. This alone gives presidents widespread power to influence the economy by setting benchmarks for federal contractors to deliver high minimum wages, pay equity, safe workplaces, and shared prosperity. The government can even stop doing business with distasteful companies that rely on federal contracts, like the private prison industry. The government also manages giant swaths of public land and can choose to open it up to development in fossil fuel production or shut that down. And there are all sorts of statutory programs where presidents get to set the rules. Excuse me. When President Kennedy in 1962, after much prodding but he lay, fulfilled campaign promise to prohibit discrimination in federally aided housing, all it took was the proverbial, quote, stroke of a pen, unquote. As Trump has repeatedly shown in entire issue areas like foreign policy, immigration, and global trade, the next president would have expansive authority, all granted by a plain reading of the Constitution a specific congressional statute or the legislative branch's studied deference. Who the next president chooses for the Federal Reserve Board will define the course of economic policy. Hopefully not. Hopefully, the next president will be able to do some fiscal policy, okay, as well. But yes, the Federal Reserve Chair, okay, and the other members of the board are very influential, no question about it. But presidents can make by various regulatory decisions, like who qualifies for overtime pay. They can decide who serves as a worker's employer, a critical determination for collective bargaining. They can choose whether corporations should still enjoy a, quote, safe harbor, unquote, okay, to facilitate buybacks of stock that enrich investors at the expense of workers. They cannot bring forth a Medicare for All Act, but they can use Section 1332 waivers from the Affordable Care Act to enable single-payer programs at the state level and potentially use $1 billion from the ACA's Prevention and Public Health Fund to defray startup costs. Once you start thinking about the possibilities, it's hard to stop. Statutory language is sometimes clear and sometimes muddled, but regulatory discretion is almost always broad. What a president chooses to emphasize and how much the letter of the law can be bent to their preferences makes a huge difference. Yeah. So, though executive orders are a poor substitute for the authorities already existing in statutory language, it's nice that Democratic primary candidates have been talking about issuing executive orders, such as Kamala Harris's proposed actions to mitigate gun violence, and Beto O'Rourke's ideas, okay, in immigration. Some executive orders will make a huge difference in people's lives, like Harris's, Amy Klobuchar's, and Cory Booker's plans for clemency boards and mass commutations for low-level federal drug offenders. Joe Biden's plan along these lines, rather predictably, is far narrower. But there's no substitute for authority from Congress, and in a surprising number of cases, presidents already have it. They don't have to rummage for a few votes for financial reform. The architecture of existing laws allows them to reform already. They don't have to muster courage from swing seat congresspeople to fight the big corporations that tax the rich. The Federal Trade Commission and the IRS can get us there. And public momentum can keep these rules in place, as advances for the American people tend to stick around. For instance, when you cancel publicly held student debt, as the Education Secretary has the authority to do under the Compromise and Settlement provision of the Higher Education Act, it's difficult to uncancel it. When you license out the excessively priced prescription drugs to generic competitors, as the government can do under the Bayh-Dole Act of 1980 or Section 1498 of the Federal Code, it is difficult to unlicense it and shoot the drug prices back up again. Okay. An aggressive executive action can spur legislative action. Congress doesn't particularly like governing, but they hate being circumvented. Presidents making known their intentions to use existing statutes to solve problems can lead to lawmakers finally getting around to it themselves. It took Obama roughly 6 years to make executive action a priority, after attempts to woo Republicans in Congress were fully exhausted. Finally, he famously said, quote, "I've got a pen and I've got a phone," unquote. It's important that presidential hopefuls think about what they can do that Mitch McConnell cannot mess with right from the jump. But the substance of those actions matters as well. If you want to fully understand the differences between the candidates, you can ditch the uninformative debates and simply ask what executive actions they plan to take. Making this reality will take an understanding of the administrative state that Democrats have paid scant attention to in the past. Will take nominating personnel throughout the executive branch with the imagination and creativity to scour the statutes and recognize opportunities to act. And most important, it will take a commitment to wielding power. There's a difference between control and power. And Democrats like to take control. Doing something useful while in control has been a different proposition. Obama had to be browbeaten into protecting dreamers with DACA or showing his support for same sex marriage. Too many Democrats still live in a perpetual defensive crouch. They're afraid to make policy for fear somebody might not like it. They crave approval rather than progress. This gets the structure of modern politics completely wrong. We've had successive wave elections practically every year since 2006 because voters are desperate for politicians to help them with their increasingly precarious economic situations, and politicians keep failing to come up with robust solutions. These wild electoral swings will not end without tangible steps to wield power. On certain issues, Trump has taken action only on the very unpopular priorities of a xenophobic base. To restore a lasting political coalition, Democrats must take action of their own to improve people's lives. We need not fear executive power as long as it does promote the general welfare. This will certainly inspire criticism. Even Obama's relatively incremental moves inspired conservative shouts about a socialist tyrant. Of course, these critics will come from the same corners that sat mute throughout the Trump presidency. To be fair, all parties exhibit situational ethics when it comes to executive power. Democrats must be willing to ignore these crocodile tears and hit back with one simple sentiment. Quote, "I'm not disrupting the constitutional order. I'm carrying out duly passed laws. I'm doing my job." Unquote. The Prospect has assembled a team of journalists and subject matter experts to identify numerous core areas where executive authority is available and warranted. We hope this can serve as a guide for how change can happen starting in 2021, regardless of who runs Congress. We also look at whether the Supreme Court can act to overturn these efforts through its own radical constitutional reinterpretations. Well, the threat of the Roberts Court actually nullifying good policy exists. That cannot become an excuse for inaction. Finally, we asked every major Democratic presidential candidate, 19 as of press time, whether they would commit to any or all of these executive power actions. To their credit, some had already announced their intentions to do so. You'll see these answers throughout this package. He means this special issue, revealing the candidates' commitment to act the way the founders envisioned presidents to act, taking care that the laws be faithfully executed. By the way, something Trump has not done. This was written on September 23rd, 2019 at 2:05 a.m. So there you are. There is Dayen's case for the day one agenda. I think it's a very convincing case. I hope you like it. I certainly basically agree with it. I find that it's very encouraging and should inspire us all the more to put Bernie Sanders in the White House. So let's go now to your many comments, what I hope became many comments, and see what you have to say. And I'm going to go back to my basic view so you can see me in all my glory. There we are. So let me go back to your comments. Thanks. Let me get my glasses on so I can see them better and read them better. I hope you're sharing this. Please share as much as you are able without jeopardizing your status with Facebook. And Kay says, Bernie is my only hope for an old age that's worth living. I wouldn't be quite so pessimistic, Kay, but he's certainly our best hope for an old age that is worth living. Cheyenne said he had to admit the obvious, I guess. I don't know who he is in this case, Kay. Is it Bernie who had to admit to the obvious? And Bonnie has joined. Hi, honey. And there are some new comments on here, which I will get to. Kay says, I call BS on his denial that he knew about it. He was a GOP before he was an independent, before he just became a Dem. SMH. Well, he was a Dem, actually. He was a GOP, he was an independent, and he was a Dem. He calls himself whatever he wants to call himself, but he has been consistently in what has been called the center or the center right. Okay, he's not been a right wing Republican. Okay, he's been sort of a centrist type of a Republican when he runs as a Republican, but he's always an establishment Republican when he runs as a Republican. And he's an establishment Democrat, okay, when he runs as a Democrat, as well as a right-wing Democrat. And Kay says if anyone votes for him, they need their head examined. Well, they could be for the oligarchs and for the establishment, and if so, then I guess he's the perfect one to vote for because, he is purely representative of the establishment. Hi, Bonnie Diane. Thank you for coming. And Kay says, if we can get Bernie elected, he'll be very busy for a while, laugh out loud. Even the corporate Democrats signed the Continuing Austerity Act to cut his chance of helping the poor and the seniors. He'll still be able to help the poor and the seniors, okay, and the college kids, as outlined here in this article. Okay, and Rich Maynard says, for a minute there, I thought you were talking about Warren, Kay Clark Ryan. And Kay says, no, she's selling out too. But by the way, September 23rd, when this article was written, it could be Dave may well have had Warren in mind because people, including Dave, were characterizing Warren as someone who was very expert at actually manipulating the administrative state. So people were touting her as being especially qualified to do these kinds of things, and better than Bernie at doing these kinds of things. But I'm not sure that she's better than Bernie because it amounts to really how good would his staff be at outlining the things that could be done. And his staff has people like David Sirota on it. It's pretty damn sharp at figuring out, okay, what government can do. And also, Stephanie Kelton is very close to him, and she is very good at figuring out, okay, what government can do as well. And he has access to many other extremely capable staff in figuring out what government can do. So I think he'll be very competent at that too. Kay says, very true and repug until the late 80s. I thought that she was a repug until the mid 90s, Kay. I had actually that impression. Lana has joined. Thank you, Lana. Kay says, the point is he's doing it to our own seniors and others. Yes, he is. And he's doing things to non-seniors as well. He's doing things to babies. Cheyenne says Nancy Pelosi will likely lead the Dem marches for cuts in SS. Anyone want to place a bet on that? No, I'm sure that's right. She will. But I also believe that if Bernie wins the presidency, she's out as a Speaker in the House. She's not going to win the contest, okay, as a Speaker. There's always a presidential party in Congress. And there will be one, okay, if Bernie wins. And that presidential block of votes that goes to every president, when the president is of that particular political party, that block of votes will not support the Nancy Pelosi if she doesn't have the approval, okay, of Bernie Sanders. And at a minimum, okay, if Bernie Sanders, if he expresses, okay, a view on this, at a minimum, he's going to be supporting Barbara Lee or maybe Jayapal. But he won't be supporting Nancy Pelosi. He's going to be wanting to get rid of her because she is the enemy, okay, of Medicare for all. On the Democratic side, in the House, she and her leadership team are the worst enemies of Medicare for all within the Democratic caucus, other than, of course, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. But those are all people who are Bernie's enemies, and he will do everything he can to see that they get to be backbenchers again. And Kay says she is already bypassing the continuing austerity acts. She already is bypassing the continuing austerity acts, as are many other corporate Dems. Absolutely true. Hopefully, a good many of them will be defeated in the primaries this year. Cheyenne says, I donate to Pelosi's opponent, Shahed Buttar, a true progressive activist. I completely agree with that. Okay, I think Cheyenne's great. You should definitely support him. And definitely do everything you can to see that he beats Nancy Pelosi this time. It's important, okay, that the progressive votes not be divided this time, okay, and that progressive comes in at least second in the primary. so that there is a head-to-head contest between Nancy Pelosi and the progressive for that House seat. Then we will get our shot at her in her district. And I think if we have a shot with a progressive running for our side, then we can retire her. Cheyenne says yes. Contact your public officials. Kay says yes. I've been following him. I hope he wins. Yeah, I just love his candidacy and his policies. He's extremely bright. He's extremely competent. His heart's in the right place. He's one of ours. We got to vote for him. Rich Maynard says they need something more first. Otherwise, the reputes are just going to whitewash it. Cheyenne says, I'm on SSDI. I don't get enough as it is. I'm sorry to hear that, Cheyenne. I know you don't get enough as it is. Cheyenne says every day is a is a marathon just to survive. And Kay says, being a low-wage working woman my whole life, I only get $600 a month, which is not enough to live on, for sure. Okay. I think Bernie in the Social Security expansion is promising to expand that. Okay, I forget what the figure is. I had the impression that he was going to raise that to a minimum of the poverty level of $14,000 or $15,000 a year, which is still too little, but also a considerable increase. In other words, he's going to set a minimum for Social Security payments, and for many people, they will be double or even triple what they're getting now. Cheyenne says, sadistic, absolutely. Cheyenne says, I doubt I will live about long enough to see the next election. And Kay says, why, Cheyenne? Are you sick? Jim has joined. Kay says, I'm to the point where eternal rest and peace don't sound but too bad right now. We can't give up, folks. We can't give up. We have to stay and fight. Because if no one else will fight for us, we have to fight for ourselves. And Rich has a link. User Seawolf925. Vito S. View as subscriber. I don't know what that's a link to, but that's all right. I'm sure Rich is leaving a good link for us. Jim Bird said, yep, big letdown. Neoliberals loved Obama on purpose failures. Yeah, they loved everything he did because for them it was like a commitment to a football star. That's what the hell was going on there. It was a celebrity commitment. Steve Wolfbrand said, I just subscribed, Richard. I'll look closer later. And Kay says, Obama was a huge disappointment to me. As soon as I saw his administration, I knew then he was a liar in chief. Yeah, I had the same feeling. Yeah, I was blogging criticisms of his. Well, I think they go back to January of 2009, but certainly by February, I was already blogging serious criticisms, which I continued all through 2009 and through 2010 and through 2011 through 2012, all through his administration. Cheyenne says, but extremely, really sorry to hear that, Cheyenne. Kay says, have any of you ever seen the documentary series called Plutocracy on Films for Action online? I watched them again this week as they've been showing them on Free Speech TV. Haven't seen them yet. You should check them out. The inequality is now history repeating itself big time. Yeah, well, I think we all know that. In spades, and Russ Gorman has joined, and my daughter Devora has joined. Hi, Russ. How are you? And Devora, thanks for joining, honey. And by the way, we're planning on giving a call to you later this night. I hope you'll have time. Giant says, I'm hoping to transition peacefully in my sleep. Kay says, that would be a blessing to me too, Cheyenne. It would be a blessing for us all eventually, folks. But so Bonnie and myself, we're planning on staying around till we're 125. I know. That's a laugh. But we intend to stay around and fight. Kay says, yesterday was my late daddy's birthday. He was born in 1907. He taught me so much about history because he lived through it. I was adopted by him and my mom in 1953, the year I was born. And that was the biggest blessing in my life. Sherry Wise has joined. Hi, Sherry. Nice to see you. In case said both my dad and my late husband died in the first week of January. But many years apart, both died of cancer, and I helped to take care of both of them as best I could. So these holidays are forever stained in my life. And Rich Maynard says the 100th year anniversary here in New England. And he has another link for us. I don't know what it's the 100th year anniversary of, but we can check that out. And Russ said that that view change started. Okay, an echo. Wait a minute, Russ. Thanks for telling me that. No, there's no reason why it should have started. Okay, an echo. The microphones are the same in both cases. But I tried to reduce the echo. Please tell me if I was successful in getting rid of it. And Kate Clark says, Kate Clark Ryan says, that Bloomberg actually promotes a nanny state. No, thank you. Already too much of that in this country. Yeah, that's because he wanted to ban soda on carbonated water in New York City. Or maybe it was the sweet sodas. It may be carbonated water was all right, but I don't know. I'm not sure what he did in New York because I wasn't living there at the time, even though I'm from New York. And Kay says Bernie and John Larson out of Connecticut want a good SS expansion. Yeah, they want a good SS expansion, but I don't think that's the end of it. I think before he's through, that Bernie is going to bring our Social Security pensions up to a European level. And that means double the amount of Social Security, okay, for everybody. Well, first it means having a minimum Social Security, and then probably doubling from there. Randy's joined. He says, "I just pretend that you are in a large space." Well, Randy, please clarify that. Okay. Any more comments or questions? While you think those over, I'm going to point out Rich Raymond says the 100th year anniversary is the Bread and Roses strike in the mills in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, but other places as well. Major turning point in labor. 6,000 people a day outside of one location. Unbelievable number of people for back then. Steve says we must elect Bernie Sanders. Absolutely, that is what we must do. So my plans for next time, Saturday night, okay, at 9 o'clock, are to cover the attack on Dave Dayen's uh, um, um, piece on what the president can do. Oh, thanks, Randy. Uh, and also the reply by Dave Dayen. Okay, both of those pieces, okay, recent pieces. Okay, I think also that it's a very interesting debate, and I will have considerable commentary on it. So I think I'll be handling that on Saturday unless something really vital intervenes. If not, then I'll be handling that on Monday. So this Saturday or Monday, that's what I'll be doing. Rich says, take care and happy holidays, everyone. Kay says, check out Plutocracy. You will be informed on real U.S. History. Thank you, Kay, for that reference. I'm sure it's very good history. I think I've seen one or two of those things, and I believe it is really good history. So I hope everyone will look at that and check out also the references I've given you here. And I hope you'll please share, like, and subscribe to YouTube. Okay, when this goes up. And for those of you who can afford to do so, I hope you'll make an occasional trip to my Patreon page and help me out so that I can become a permanent live streamer over the next 10 years. Okay, I'm very modest, in my desires. I have Social Security too. So what I'm looking for is what I'm sure quite a lot of us looking for, but just that through these live streaming activities, I can not only help the movement, but also get some supplementary income for the bills. Kay says, always good to talk to like-minded folks. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for coming, Kay. Good night, all, and have a wonderful day tomorrow. and later tonight, and I will see you on Saturday evening. Thanks very much for coming, and good night.